Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. I am recording this another time because I wasn't concise enough in my initial stuff of going through this. So first and foremost, there will be no guest this time. Unfortunately, there's not a single Titan that I know that really plays the game anymore. I have never known that many hunters. And as far as warlocks, the warlock that I was trying to have on ghosted basically. We're just gonna, it's just gonna be me. Now, I have used all these supers. Y'all will be seeing when I talk about these, a kind of a loop of me using the super in the background. That being said, though, if you are a warlock or a hunter, do let me know where y'all would probably place things in the comments, or if I have something wrong, or if y'all like or don't like my suggestions. And Titans, y'all can do the same. Um, so at the end of each Guardian class, I am going to let you know, like, hey, this is what I think my hottest take is going to be. This is what I think is going to be the most generally agreed upon take. This tier list is going to be organized. I'm going to go through the classes supers, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to. So, for example, I'm going to do Titans, then Warlocks, then Hunters, but they're going to be organized by what is best and what is not on the actual tier list. So you might have a Nova War being ahead of a Thunder Crash. Will this actually happen? Absolutely not. But some other stuff I need to point out as well. I will be giving one piece of criticism, one positive. Unless the super is really bad, then it might have like one or two pieces of criticism. For positives, if the super is really bad, it might not have that many positives. Same with the super that's really good. I might have a few more positives. I might have nothing to say negative about it. I will have one suggestion for a lot of the supers that struggle. If I think the super is perfectly fine in the state it is in, then I will say that. I'm not going to hold the lack of exotics against the stasis and strand supers. So let's keep that in mind. However, that will come into consideration for some supers in the same tier. Now, on that note, let's go ahead and get started with Titans. We're going to start with Titans, going to go to Warlocks, then we're going to go to Hunters. So, Titans. First super we're going to do is Blade Fury. In my opinion, the super is pretty solid, no diddy. Now, Blade Fury is kind of interesting because it doesn't really have quite, it doesn't have a proper exotic that quite works with it necessarily. I am not counting exotics like Syntheseps or Worgon's Caress. I'm just not doing that because they can be applied to any super that's melee based. Let's go with the positives. Positives here is it has a ranged heavy attack. It has a ranged heavy attack, which is quite nice. Massive positive. It does good damage as well, so that's really good as well. And it can suspend, it ties the system class subclass verbs without needing aspects or exotics. Now the reason why it's not in super good is because it really does need Banner of War. It really does need Banner of War, and without Banner of War, it is a little bit problematic to use in high rank content to because you can step out because you don't really have that much protection on the initial cast. You also have to be up close and personal, which is a big problem in GM situations. But all in all, it's a pretty good super. Do I have any suggestions for it? Not really. I don't really have any suggestions for it. I think it's pretty good. Now, on to Bubble. Yeah, we're rapid firing these. Bubble, in my opinion, ooh, mine Legos just cracked a crap ton. Now, Bubble, here's the situation with Bubble. In my opinion, it is pretty solid super. Now, I do believe this is going to be one of my hotter takes. Okay, so like Hot Sauce Man, why this up here? Give me the positives. Number one, it has multiple exotics that work with it. Homicide 14 and no backup plans. We're going to talk about no backup plans in a second, but first, let's talk about the super itself. It gives Overshield, is a decent support super. My piece of criticism is I don't like the fact that they removed the damage buff from Bubble, because I feel like that kind of helped mitigate, Wells' damage buff. But is it that much of a problem? No, I wish it got at least a small damage boost when you used it. The whole change that they did is negligible at best. But, those interactions with Helmsade 14, I massively suggest run a GM, run the Monarch and Helmsade 14. You get your super back so often. Do keep in mind, it is one of the few supers in the game that while the super is active, you can get super energy. The only other super that's like this as well. So do keep that in mind. You basically have an infinite link. No backgammon plans users, this is flat out the best super in the game to use. Because you can just slap it down, and now you do not have to dip in and out of the bubble. You can stay outside of the bubble and do your big damage. That's why it's been pretty solid. The main piece of criticism is you should not be using this in raids. I feel like this is definitely a GM slash dungeon situation where you don't have a warlock that's using well, or the team's struggling a little bit with survivability. So, and it can guarantee a safe revive. The only change that I would make to it is give it at least like a 15% damage bonus, then let Helma State 14 give it a damage bonus that surpasses well. Like, just give it a little bit of extra juice, but give the base bubble like a 15% damage buff. So that the other people that aren't using like a no backup plans, for instance, do have some sort of a damage buff. Now, on to the next super here. We're going to actually move through the Void supers first. In my opinion, Titan has the best set of elemental supers, that being Void Titan. I think the other Guardian classes that have multiple supers in an element, I think, struggle a little bit more than Void Titan does. And we'll talk about all the Guardian classes in my notes for their supers, because I do have some interesting observations, but stay tuned to the end of the video for that. Sentinel Shield, in my opinion, is actually better than Blade Fury. I think it is a really solid super. Again, mostly because of those exotic interactions. By the way, this is assuming that of course, a damage nerf is going to be coming, and this is assuming it's supposed to nerf damage. Do I agree necessarily with the amount of damage it's doing currently? No. This super it should not necessarily be used for damage. In my personal opinion, that's not what the super realistically should be getting used. Realistically what the super should be getting used for. It's an ad clearing super. You have Bubble, which is a support super, and now you have Sentinel Shield, which is an ad clearing super. Doomfang Pauldrons makes this last an exceedingly long amount of time. It is really potent, and I would heavily suggest you use Controlled Demolition and Bastion with the super. In terms of aspects, the Controlled Demolition makes the super even stronger. Like, whew. Bubble, you should be using Offensive Bulwark and Bastion, but with Sentinel Shield, you should be using Controlled Demolition and Bastion. It's strong. I do like the fact that with it, you can stay healed up and everything. You can safely guard and get a revive if you're in higher rank content. So, very, 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 very solid super. My pieces of criticism, I don't really have that many. It's a really good super. Would I change anything? I would like the actual Shield Bash to suppress the actual melee. Well, my main thing is I would really want Doomfang Pauldrons to give the super a second shield throw. Like, even if you have to nerf the super energy extension, I would really like a second shield throw. That's something I would really be like a quality of life change. But on that note, that's all I would do for Sentinel Shield. Now, the next Void super is Axes. I'm going to put Axes. It's a pretty solid super. Here's why. I'm going to put it below Bubble. Reason why it's below Bubble is Axes' tracking and the relics themselves. The relics, there's really no real reason to pick them up except to just use the heavy attack on them to get them out of the way. I feel like Destiny 2 has way too many interactables in the game. Like, just for Titans, you have the Axes now, you have Diamond Lances, and you have Tangles. All of which you can have on Prismatic, which is kind of ridiculous. Trying to juggle picking up that much shit. The Axes don't necessarily do enough damage to warrant their use. I do like the fact that throwing Axes weaken, but I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm necessarily a huge fan of the fact that it weakens, but if you're going to do anything, I guess weakening is perfectly fine. I would like the Axes to have the actual relics that has some type of anti-champ capabilities, like either make the targets volatile or make the heavy attack suppress or something. Just give the relics a little bit of juice, or just remove them. Just remove them. And the tracking is sometimes still trash. And it takes ages to cast. But because of its really solid damage, Titans Titans only really one-off damage super, so yeah, that's why it's in pretty solid pretty much. That being said, the Void options are so good. You have basically, you can fill every single role that you can have in your average RPG. You can fill it with Void Titan single-handedly. And that can't be said for any other set of subclasses. Now, we're going to move on to Solar Titan here. Burning Maul is going in questionable use. Questionable use. There's a few reasons for this. Burning Maul as a... Using it feels pretty bad. In my personal opinion, Burning Maul feels the worst to use. For Titans, Burning Maul feels the worst to use. The spinning attack is a little bit jarring to use sometimes, especially if you're in the air, and I feel like its range is way too small. And the heavy attack feels weak. I feel like it should do like a Kepri Horn style way forward, and leave like a cyclone at the end, just make the wave bigger. Make the wave bigger to feel like striking the ground is actually doing something more potent. Because it feels extremely weak. I'm not a huge fan of the super. Its heavy attack cannot hit flying enemies. And by the way, we're counting the heavy attacks because the light attacks, obviously with the light attacks you can hit a flying enemy if you want to. Unless they're outside of your jump range, then that's something different. But yeah, Burning Maul can't hit flying enemies with its heavy attack. The only thing it has, really, its only positive is it has Pyrogales, but the problem with Pyrogales is it's one of the worst DPS supers with Titan. A Banner of War and Blade Fury outpaces it, Stasis Titan outpaces it. We'll get to Stasis in a second, but it's not going to be as high as you think it is for specific reasons. And of course, you have Thunder Crash, you have Axes, all of which outpace Pyrogales with Warring Flames. Like, you need Warring Flames stacked up. It requires quite a bit of setup, and it requires you getting to damage fast. You can't just like wait around for a while and then damage happens. So that's one of my biggest issues with it. The Burning Maul, the Pyrogale damage needs to be increased. It needs to be. What changes would I make? Just increase the width. And the spinning attack, I would like to increase its range for hitting enemies, because it's pretty dangerous to be that close and just spinning. So that is Burning Maul for you. Now, while we have Burning Maul in questionable use, we have our first super good super, that being Throwing Hammers. I'll give my piece of criticism right now. My biggest piece of criticism is it needs Sol Invictus to work. Sol Invictus should be baked into Hammer Assault, the super, like by default, because Sol Invictus is basically a requirement. However, it is so good at ad clearing. You have Hollow Fire Hard if you want to use that, which more so works with Sol Invictus, but it technically works with Hammer Assault. You also have Phoenix Cradle. Phoenix Cradle is extremely good. It was especially good for Crota, specifically because if your bubble user died, the bubble would disappear, and Crota was breaking wells. So having a couple Titans with like Hammer Assault and Phoenix Cradle was actually pretty good because sunspots can't exactly go away, and you're doing decent damage as well with your super. So that's honestly kind of the nice bit about it. It's just, in my opinion, Hammer Assault is the best ad clear super in the entire game. It fits into, it fits into your subclass verbs very well, and if you're standing in a sunspot, it increases its duration, and it can hit flying enemies. It can hit flying enemies. So, fun fact, Titans only have 2 ad clearing supers that can even hit flying enemies. And those 2 are Hammer Assault and Blade Fury, but Blade Fury's suspend thing isn't as potent as throwing the hammer for Hammer Assault. So that's why it's going to be super good. My only suggestion is Sol Invictus needs to be a part of Hammer Assault. It just doesn't feel great without it. That's my biggest criticism. Even if it's like, make it a far weaker version, but it just does not feel good without a Sol Invictus. It just doesn't. Just one piece of criticism. Now we're gonna move on to Arc. Fist of Havoc. Questionable use. I do believe it is better than Burning Maul, though. Now let me explain. So the only reason why it is better than Burning Maul is because Fist of Havoc actually feels somewhat decent to use. Fist of Havoc has 2 major issues. One, it only has one exotic that works with it, and it's ugly. That being Eternal Warrior. However, Eternal doesn't do that much to help it. Its biggest issue is that, again, it cannot hit flying enemies. The heavy attack can't. That'll be the common theme for Titan Supers. The shoulder charge also does not do that much, and it doesn't cover enough distance, in my opinion. I would really like Fist of Havoc to cover a little bit more distance. Or what I'll say the positives. It can stop champions. Now, another positive is it actually works surprisingly well with Syntheseps. Because when you're slamming into a group of enemies, the enemies are going to be alive and they're going to be surrounding you, and then you're going to nuke them with that extra damage. So Syntheseps actually works quite well with Fist of Havoc, specifically because you need to be so up close and you basically need to be surrounded. Now, my criticism here is, you know, obviously what I've said before, but the only real subclass tie it has is blinding, and it cannot really be helped by aspects or anything of the like. Also, exiting the super is really bad. You have no damage resist coming out of the super. Also, trying to heal during the super is quite tough as well. But essentially, when the super ends, you are guaranteed to die if you are not behind cover, basically. Or not in a strike situation. Like a regular, basic bitch strike or patrol. But if you're in anything higher than a basic patrol or a basic strike, you're going to die when exiting the super. Now, suggestions here, let shoulder charge do, like, make it carry distance, or while in Fist of Havoc, let shoulder charge jolt targets on hit. Meaning when you use that light attack, it jolts targets. That'd be absolutely fantastic. I feel like the heavy attack doesn't necessarily need that. Or if you want, you can have the heavy attack jolt and the light attack blind. Do something with that and have damage resist while exiting. Just give it a little bit of something, or have the shockwave have a healing pulse or something like that. Just something to give it a little bit of survivability when exiting the super. But that's Fist of Havoc for you. Another issue with Fist of Havoc is it has to contend with Thunder Crash. Thunder Crash, which is super good, and is it better than Hammer Assault? Absolutely. It does not need an aspect. It doesn't even necessarily need its exotic, but its exotic does boost its damage a little bit, and it gives you melee energy. It gives you extra super energy when you kill targets with the melee while you're amplified. So that's quite nice. So shoulder charging, doing that little shoulder bump. Usually what I like to do is after you Thunder Crash, you're on a champ or something, I like to like melee to make sure I have knockout, then shoulder charge a group of enemies. It gives you quite a bit of super back, which is kind of nice. So Thunder Crash is very, very solid. It's Titan's best one-off super. I would argue it's Titan's best super, even on Prismatic, because like it's way better than Axe's. However, my pieces of criticism here is first and foremost, it can slide off of bosses, which is a little bit annoying at times. So it can be quite an issue when you just have to kind of aim at the feet. And it does have damage resist when exiting the super, something that Fist of Havoc desperately needs, especially since Arc in general has no real healing or damage resist in it. This will affect a lot of the rankings of the other Arc supers, so keep that in mind as we go forward, that I am taking that into consideration. But yeah, Thunder Crash, best Titan super. Now, Stasis, Titan. Glacial Quake, I'm putting it in viable. And you might be saying, oh, Hot Sauce Man, it does great damage. Oh, it does such a good damage. Why isn't it in, like, super good or at least pretty solid? Think about the conditions that need to be met for that Stasis Titan super to actually do really strong damage. The boss has to be on the ground, which immediately nullifies a lot of bosses. The boss also has to be quite big and in size and not move around much. The majority of Destiny 2 bosses do not fulfill those conditions, which is why a lot of the times when people use it, they're using it on giant ogres or Rivet. Not really much outside of that. So, you might be saying, okay, but still, the super's pretty good, right? Well, okay, let's get into it here. The heavy attack cannot hit flying enemies, of course. Also, the crystals do not auto shatter. Do not auto shatter. So you have to heavy light attack still. You have to heavy and light attack still, or kind of position yourself weirdly. Also, you do have to be at an optimal distance to use the super to its fullest. You have to be an optimal distance away from an enemy. You can't be too close, and you can't be too far either. So it is not a necessarily easy to use super. And when exiting the super, though, however, if you built correctly, you should have um, frost armor, which is quite nice. Some positives here is its damage is quite good in terms of ad clearing and whatnot. It does build into shattering. You do get a lot of stasis shards, so you can get that frost armor up as well. Popping the super isn't that bad either. The light attack's not terrible either, especially now that the light attack's gotten buffed, but the actual stasis Titan melee has gotten buffed. So it is viable. Stasis as a whole itself is pretty good. Stasis as a whole is pretty good. It's just the super is not the best part of Stasis Titan. That belongs to Diamond Lance and Glacier Grenade. That does not belong to the super itself. So for that reason, it's going to stay inviable, but I think that's the proper spot where it should be. Alright everyone, so I'm recording this again, so obviously y'all are going to see that the pinned images are a little bit different. So now that we've wrapped up Titans, we can discuss Warlocks and Hunters. I spent way too much time in previous recordings going into the individual details of Warlocks and Hunters. So do expect the Warlock and Hunter sections to be a little bit shorter. That being said, you're going to get some criticism, like every super's going to get some piece of criticism, some positives, and a suggested change. So first and foremost, we are going to tackle Needlestorm. Needlestorm, in my opinion, is in pretty solid. Now, Needlestorm, some positives. Does great damage. It's essentially a one-off super, which Warlocks don't really have. Like, not really one-off, but I guess, yeah, technically a one-off super. Now, unfortunately, even though it does good damage, there's some issues with it. Number one is its subclass tie-ins are not helpful. It does spawn threadlings, but the problem with this is usually you're using this on one singular target. The AoE is not wide enough to really encompass a pretty wide area. Like, you can't use it like Axis, for example. So, my piece of criticism here is that it's not super, like, the subclass tie-ins are not great for single targets, but it's also too condensed to really properly be a great ad clear, necessarily. It's not good at both. It's a jack of all trades but master of none situation with Needlestorm, in my opinion, at least. My suggested change for this super is I would change, if you're going to keep it more single target based, I personally would rather, instead of spawning threatlings, let the bolts explode in suspending bursts, so that Warlocks have a way to suspend on Prismatic that does not involve an exotic. Another option here that I would go for here as well is similar to Blade Barrage, throwing the Needlestorm in two waves sort of deal, then keep the Threadlings. But I would personally rather have the Suspending Bolts. On to the next super. That super being the Stasis Warlock super. Again, some of my observations are going to be towards the end of the video, so do keep that in mind. I think it's slightly better than Needlestorm, but I do not believe it to be better than Axis. I do believe Titans have the worst Stasis super, for reasons that I said in the Titan section. But for Stasis Warlocks, it's solid at single target damage. The biggest issue, it also does pretty good damage. But the biggest issue with the super for me personally is it's terrible at ad clearing. It does not fit very well into ad clear, but it can stop champions in their tracks, and this not just like any champion. It can, like, it's basically an all champ super, which is quite unique, and not even really Stasis Titan is not good enough at doing that for that to be much of a viable option. But like, you have a barrier champion that might start putting up the shield, bam, freeze the bitch. It's very good, and especially like yellow bars and that sort of deal. It's very good in that niche. So that's why it's a pretty solid. I think it's slightly better than Needlestorm because of the fact that it does have the freeze and the shatter damage. So that's why it's up there. And one of the suggestions that I would change here is I would change it to where the heavy attack applies slow stacks. So that for an ad clearing situation, you can slow a bunch of enemies, you can kind of spam the heavy attack. You know, the light attack, you still have that shattering going on. So I would like the heavy attack to slow enemies. That's my personal deal. Now on to Arc, Storm Trance. Storm Trance, I'm putting it at viable, given my Glacial Quake is going to remain as the lowest of the viable supers, just because it's so situational. But Storm Trance, let's talk about some positives first. Does really solid damage, is good at ad clearing, and Crown of Tempest really extend the super quite a bit. Crown of Tempest is really good, so like same with Doom Fangs for Sentinel Shield. Um, However, that's where the positives are going to end. Some of the negatives here is its activation on jolting on cast. You have to be right on top of a champion, and is that really ever a good idea? No. just no, it's not. Now, as far as it's hitting flying enemies and whatnot, I'm not completely sure. My other piece of criticism here is the range on Storm Trance is not it's not clear in my opinion. It's not super clear. And also, you kind of just sit there and hold a button the entire time, and it's kind of like, a little bit boring. But, onto my suggestions, I would personally suggest giving Warlocks sort of a similar animation to Thunderclap. You know, you pull your arms back, and instead of jolting at your feet, you send a wave of jolting electricity forward. And then putting like a blue ring or something, like electricity ring, to show you the range of Storm Trance. I feel like that would help quite a bit. So yeah, wave of jolt forward instead of going downward so that you can activate and you just kind of have to be facing the overload. You don't necessarily have to be right on top of them. So those are my suggestions for Storm Trance. Now on to Chaos Reach. Chaos Reach, Chaos Reach. I'm going to put it in between Bubble and Axes. Reason being here is Bubble is really good for support, especially if you do not have a well. However, an Axis is great for damage, but the issue with Axis is Thunder Crash is another option. But Chaos Reach, it's good at it does act clearing and boss damage pretty well. I do wish the Chaos Reach either lasted a little bit longer. So okay, well, you know, we'll get into suggestions a little bit later. But positives here, it summons a Jolting Lightning Strike, like a one when you're holding on a target, which is pretty good. It can add clear pretty well, as I said. I think damage is not bad. A piece of criticism here is you basically have to wear GMX. You have to wear GMX. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have to wear it. Otherwise, like the super like ends way too soon. So my suggestions here is first off, extend the duration of the super just a little bit, and maybe tack this onto GMX. Replace the sprinting on GMX with, I know a lot of words may be upset, replace the sprinting, but hear me out. Give it sort of a cold hard treatment to where if you hold Chaos Reach on a single target, its damage ramps up drastically. And maybe let the lightning strikes happen a little bit faster too. Like, increase that single target damage for holding on a target, and then maybe give Warlock some exotic synergy with Cold Heart, because you know Cold Heart, Giga, you know Chaos Reach, you know Warlocks. Y'all gotta hear me out on that leg. I feel like that would be an amazing combo. So that is where Chaos Reach is going to be pretty solid. Now on to the Void Supers. The Void Warlock Supers. Oh boy, we're going to be doing both Nova Bombs at the same time. Because of reasons that I'll have in a second. Nova Bomb Cataclysm. It does great damage, but putting it above Axes here, and Slow Bomb, I'm putting right below Axes. Okay, Cataclysm is one that sends out bolts. I believe it's the best Warlock super for DPS on Prismatic, if I remember correctly. However, you cannot just be a DPS super and go to super good. Like Thunder Crash does have Thunder Crash is great at damage. However, you can get amplified. It has a pretty big AoE, so you can use it for champions as well. You get damage resist when coming out of it. Like, it's actually really solid. The Titans don't have very many other options. Meanwhile, while you're on Warlock, you have another Nova Bomb as an option. You have Needle Storm, which does good damage, and you do have so many super options that, like, having a one-off on Warlock does feel a little bit strange. Warlocks have a DPS super, but the issue with this is you cannot really use the super for ad clearing. You have to use it for boss damage. While Thunder Crash, you can use it to clear enemies with. For Cataclysm, you can't really, because if you whip, as you'll see in the background, the bolt, you only like 2 bolts come out if you accidentally hit the ground. Meanwhile, with Vortex, if you hit the ground, bam, that's kind of it. Vortex is slightly worse than Axis in my opinion because of the damage, but it's better than the 2 other Warlock supers because you can use it for ad clearing and can do pretty well at that. As like sort of a one-off ad clearing super. Cataclysm though is only higher than Axis strictly because of the damage. No other reason. Now, my suggestions here for these supers. Suggestion number 1, combine the supers. Make them one thing. And make it sort of like an enhanced solar grenade. Just have it spit out the Seekers as the super stays there. However, if you want to keep these supers there, then I have a couple suggestions. For Cataclysm specifically, make the ball last a little bit and make it spit out Seekers. And for Vortex, I think the big thing that Vortex should get is giving I don't know if they even can do this, but while it's on the ground, or while it's there, especially to add some ad clearing ubiquity here, make enemies aggro towards it. Give it the Titan Barricade treatment, or give it, the bubble treatment. Give it the bubble treatment. Let draw enemies in. I'll more so get into reasons for that at the end of the video. So that's why Nova Bombs are there, but, that's what Nova Bombs are going to be. Nova Warp, never use. Nova Warp, never use. Now, Nova Warp is kind of an interesting situation here. So, Nova Warp, Warlocks, if you want to personally feel how it is to use most Titan supers in high-end content, start using Nova Warp. If you want to hear about why Titans complain so much about supers, go use Nova Warp and you will understand. I'm not saying the Titan supers are as bad as Nova Warp, but a lot of the Titan supers are equally as unviable in high-end content as Nova Warp. The only reason why Nova Warp is even this low is even lower than like Glacial Quake, Fist of Havoc, Burning Maul. The only reason why it's lower than those is because this super feels like complete shit to use, does not have much subclass tie-in at all. You can get used to it, but it's too much work. It's too much work. Too much work. And an alternative option here is the Nova Bombs are just so far and away way better than Nova Warp. In my opinion, this is one of the few supers that I believe can get deleted. Can get deleted. Because I don't have any suggestions for the supers. I have nothing positive to say about this super. This super should get deleted. That's where I'm at. I can't necessarily say the same for the Titan supers because the worst of the Titan supers are salvageable. Mostly. But, Nova Warp in my opinion isn't, and so it's going to remain in never use. Now, this is where I might have some hot takes here. Dawnblade. We have our first super that's going to be above Warlock super that's going to be above Bubble. That's going to belong to Dawnblade. It has some positives here. It has several exotics that work with it. It has Dawn Chorus. It has pseudo Wings of Sacred Dawn. Like usually, if you're using that exotic, you're using Dawnblade. That's more of a PvP thing. But this is the PvE ranking, tier list. But another exotic that I really like using with it is Prometheus Spur. I know no one else really uses it, but I personally love Prometheus Spur. That's just me. But the super is actually quite good. It applies Scorch stacks. It's not supposed to be a single target damage super. It's not supposed to be. And I think that's perfectly fine. It's kind of similar to Sentinel Shield, but while Sentinel Shield does have controlled demolition, none of the Warlock supers really have an aspect that directly works with them. I will say this is something that has helped Titan Supers and strengthen them, is the fact that they have aspects that really help them out. But Warlocks really don't have a single aspect that helps with the Super. Like, not a single one. Meanwhile, Titans have Banner of War, which helps Blade Fear. They have Soul Invictus, which helps Hammer Assault. Um, Sentinel Shield, which, Control Demolition helps out with, So the Titans have several options there. But Warlocks don't really have those same options here. And I do think that hurts Daybreak a little bit. I'm gonna call it Daybreak, or um, I'm gonna try to call it's either Dawnblade or Blade Fury. I can't remember which one. So I believe one name is old and the other one is not. But yeah, those are my kind of thoughts. The only thing I would change is extend the duration of the super. I feel like that's what it needs, because it feels like it's too short. Now on to Well of Radiance. I'm putting it above Hammer Assault, but right below Thunder Crash. Well is super good. Well is hands down the best support super in the game still. The nerf didn't change anything. I just gotta be honest. Warlocks, y'all did not have to use Well as much as y'all did in the fucking first place. It did not, like, the changes to Well did not impact its usage in any meaningful way. It's just made Warlocks start to wean off the teeth of the Well, at least in GM situations and dungeon situations, because there's so many other support options. But in raids and a harder and like master dungeons and whatnot, you're still using Well. You're not taking it off. That's just the nature of it. You need that damage buff. Now, those are all the positives. You heal. You can heal. You get that damage buff. Best support super. You do have an exotic that works with it, namely Phoenix Protocol. Not Phoenix Protocol. Phoenix Cradle. I kept messing this up last time. Phoenix Cradle is extremely good. It can help. Phoenix Cradle is more for like a GM situation and just to help clear ads while in your well, so you can have it constantly. Um, However, Starfire Protocol is still good with well. It's still great with well. So, don't knock Starfire Protocol. Please and thank you. It also has Lunafaction boots, but no one really uses Lunafaction boots anymore. And it does also, I believe, have an interaction with Boots of the Assembler. I believe it has strengthened Healing Seekers, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, it does have quite a few interactions as well. Now, there's nothing I would necessarily do to change well necessarily. All of the changes that I would do to help would be to nerf well. The only reason why it's not above Thunder Crash is due to the fact the well can be destroyed. Specifically for bosses like Crota, for example, could destroy that well sword very easily, and oh, you're done. While a bubble can't be destroyed for the most part, the biggest issue with bubble is if the user died, the bubble disappears. But the positive with the well is if the warlock dies, the well stays around. So those are going to be my notes for well. Any suggestions that I have for well, so that Warlocks can stop being on it. Bubble just has to get damage buff. It has to get buffed. Well either needs to disappear when the caster dies as well, or Bubble needs to stick around when the user dies, and it needs a damage bonus. Like they Bubble and Well have to be comparable in both health, like giving players health and the damage buff, but they just aren't. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Well. Not as good as Thunder Crash, because Thunder Crash is just great. It's just OP. Now, Song of Flame. We're putting right above Glacial Quake, but we're going to stick it in Viable. Reason being is I don't necessarily question people using Song of Flame because it's new. Now, first, as we go into the Super, keep in mind I'm not taking a massive consideration on, it has no exotics, and I'm not taking that into consideration when placing the Super specifically. I am in terms of the older Supers, but this one is not taken into consideration. So, the reason why it doesn't below Stormtrance is due to the fact that Stormtrance and Chaos Reach, they're two pretty different supers. If you're on Arc Warlock, you're using Chaos Reach for the damage, and you're using the Crown of Tempest super. Sometimes I forget what it means, what the name of the super is. But, you know, you float around, that's for ad clear for the most part. Song of Flame, however, does not fulfill the triage of light supers very easily. With Void Titan, you have Sentinel Shield, ad clear, bubble, support, and axes, boss damage. While for Warlock, you have Wealth, support, Daybreak for ad clear, and Song of Flame for ad clear too? Now let's talk about some positives here. You can shoot your gun during, but it feels weird to shoot your gun, being able to shoot your gun to the super. It kind of makes it feel wasteful of a super just being able to shoot your guns. I'm also not necessarily a huge fan of it being first person, but I completely understand why it's in first person. The grenade does decent damage. The melee is a basic bitch Warlock melee. Don't worry, I will have more complaints about Warlock supers when we get to the end of the video. Because I have some interesting thoughts that you might not hear from a Titan main. But Song of Flame does decent damage. It is pretty good at ad clearing. My biggest pieces of criticism here is lack of imagination when it comes to the super in general. And the grenade takes way too long to actually get to the target. If you are in sort of a situation where you're with multiple people, the likelihood that that target is going to die before your grenade even lands is kind of high. Just saying. So that's one of my biggest issues with Song of Flame, is the grenade takes too long, and the other supers are just flat out better. They just are. So it's viable, I'm not going to question its use, but it doesn't fulfill that blank spot that Solar has for damage. So that's my thoughts on Warlock supers. Now stay tuned to the end of the video to hear about my thoughts on my general thoughts on Warlock supers. You know, got a little bit of a sneak peek there, but now we are going to move on to Hunters. Now, Hunters, I have played this Guardian class the least, but I generally have the most experience with the Darkness classes, Void and Solar. I barely have any experience with Arc, but I obviously had to get myself familiarized for this video. Now, the Strand Hunter Super is pretty solid, but where, I'm going to put it above Blade Fury, but right below Sentinel Shield. Sentinel Shield and Control Demolitionist is just so strong, it's going to remain in pretty solid. Now, Strand Hunter Super. I think it's called Threat Inspector. No, that's the aspect. I don't remember what the super's called, so I'm going to call it Strand Hunter Super from now on. Now, a couple of notes here. Positives, right? Really good at ad clearing. You know, you can grapple into a group of enemies. Bam! You can grapple during the super, which is kind of insane. Also, it does great single target damage. It fully satisfied the roles of ad clearing and damage. Here are my criticisms here. First and foremost, the damage, you being kind of... You have to be sort of at an optimal distance for it to do good damage with a light attack. Specifically with the tip of the dart, which I'm not necessarily a huge fan of. That's probably going to be my biggest piece of criticism here. I don't have very many suggestions for the super. So that's kind of where we're at. Now, Saints Hunter Super is going to super good. I forget. I think it was called Withering Blade, but I don't really remember. But it's Silence of Squall. Silence of Squall. I just remembered it. So Silence of Squall here is going to be in super good because it's really good at ad clearing. It's not particularly the best at bosses necessarily, but putting it in a wave group of those ads are going to die. You can put it in a group of yellow bars too. So while Strand Hunter kind of fits the ad clearing and boss damage, Stasis Hunter fulfills that role of yellow bars ad clear. And I feel like it's putting in that role. It also stuns champions as well, which is always a massive plus. There's nothing much negative that I have to say. If anything, I would like the Tornado width to be increased, even if in exchange the slow stack set of builds is slower, because PvP reasons. Because sometimes the tracking is a little bit weird at times, and sometimes it feels like the Silence and Squall itself feels a little too self-contained, if that makes sense. Now on to Arc. Arc Staff. Arc Staff is a skilled super. I can't justifiably put it above really very many of the Void supers. It has a pretty high skill ceiling in my opinion. This is definitely a PvP super. That's just a fact of the matter. It is for sure a PvP super. it is also quite unique in the fact that it has a different heavy attack depending on if you are in the air or on the ground, which I found to be honestly quite strange. Um, it works though, but especially coming from a Titan where all of the heavy attacks, it doesn't matter if you're in the air or not, all the attacks are the exact same, and Warlock even, that is the case for that, but it was kind of strange playing with Arc Hunter a little bit and seeing that um, the attacks are a little bit different. I think it does solid damage. If anything, I would like the standing heavy to have a little bit more range. And I will say, Arc Hunter doesn't necessarily... Arc in general doesn't help you be super close. So that is probably a big issue. But with the Arc Staff, you can guard with it. But I do believe it is a pretty solid super. I honestly would not necessarily do that much. It has Blight Ranger, it has Raiju's Harness, but I do feel like it kind of needs an exotic that gives you that oomph, you know. But now we're going to get into Gathering Storm. Gathering Storm is going to be a first super good super to usurp Thunder Crash. Reason being,
That monument must be the radial mass.
it does a lot of damage. You can also does the haha funny of unicorning ogres, but it is so insanely good at ad clearing. It is essentially a Giga Witherhorde. It's like if Witherhorde and Anarchy had a child together, and then had Arcstaff as the grandfather. You know, it's like all three of them had like a child together. That's kind of what you get with Gathering Storm. It's quite it is quite unique. It does last quite a while too, and it does jolt targets as well, so it does have some synergy there. It's just so ubiquitous. It's more ubiquitous than Thunder Crash because an issue with Thunder Crash is you have to get in melee. You have to be in melee range. You just do. You have to fly towards the enemy. While Gathering Storm, you can do it at a distance. So yeah, just on that, yeah, it's just so good. I don't have very many negative. I don't have anything negative to say about it, and I have no suggestions for Gathering Storm. Now on to Storm's Edge, the newest one. I'm actually going to put it at top of questionable use. No, I know hunters might be being, oh, but it's insane. It's great, you know, in PvP. You know, I've seen some clips of it, but this is PvE. There's really no reason to run Storm's Edge over Gathering Storm, or even Arc Staff for that matter. Storm Edge does feel a little bit clunky to use, and it has the same issue that grenades have sometimes. Now, we'll see it in the background at some point, but a massive issue is teleporting forward can get interrupted by projectiles. I don't know why this happens. Like, for just some reason, I will just stop midair while you know, teleporting to the enemy. Also, the spinning AoE is not really big enough, and it doesn't do much. Like, it needs to jolt, or like, something a little bit better, but it kind of just does nothing. It's basically the Strand Hunter if you like diluted it and made it worse. So there's just no reason to run the super over Gathering Storm or even Arc Staff, and again, it fails to complete the triage that Void Titan has. Void Titan, again, you have ad clear, you have support, you have boss damage. Warlocks, unfortunately, also failed. It has 2 ad clears and support. And Arc Hunter fails because Arc Hunter did not get a support. It only has 2 ad clear and damage, boss damage. Well, technically speaking, Gathering Storm is a little bit of both, and Storm's Edge is a little bit of both. But while Gathering Storm kind of leans a little bit more into boss damage, it is a one-off, and Storm Edge kind of leans more into the ad clear. But it's not good enough at either boss damage or ad clear to really justify its use. And it's also a multi-use deal, so I don't know. I'm just not a huge fan of Storm's Edge. I'm putting it in questionable use for that reason. Kind of a similar reason why Fist of Havoc is there. My only suggestion would give the heavy attack jolt. Give the heavy attack jolt desperately. And give me a little bit clearer of a set number of charges rather than kind of just, it feels like it's kind of random on how many times you can use it. Alright, so now we're going into the Solar Hunter Supers. First, I'm going to get the obvious one out of the way. We'll just put this in S tier. Oh, no, that's the 6 shoddy. We're putting the 3 shoddy up in S tier. It's better than Gathering Storm. It is the best damage super in the entire game. Best damage super in the entire game. You can get buffed by Radiant and whatnot, so no negatives. It's an only positive super. It is the best super in the game. No questions asked. Okay, now we've gotten that situated. Blade Fury. What up? There we are. I'm putting it above Axis because Axis takes a fuck ton of time to cast. But below Cataclysm because it is a little bit less damage. Blade Fury can be used for ag clear and boss damage. It works extremely well with Shards of Galanor. Especially on Atheon, I actually did not use Golden Gun for Atheon because Atheon kind of moves around, so it's kind of wasting time having to aim. And the biggest issue with Golden Gun with Celestial is if you miss, you wasted a super. An entire super. But Shards of Galanor, I was getting my super bag very fast, you know, throwing out those blades, especially man, I really wish Bungie should revert the nerf on Shards of Galanor. It's just so good. I do really like Shards of Galanor. But yeah, my only negatives here is it doesn't deal enough damage. It just doesn't, and I really wish it did deal quite a bit of damage. Also, I do feel like it would have been a kind of an interesting choice if Storm's Edge would have been applied. That logic would have been applied to a Solar Hunter super, because you know you could scorch or ignite all of the enemies when you teleport or something like that, and then you can make yourself radiant that way. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of more options with using a blade as, you know, Solar Super rather than Arc. But, you know, we'll leave that alone. Now, the 6-shotty. We're putting it in viable. Again, Stasis Titan is going to remain as the lowest of the viable. This is the actual aspects carry Stasis Titan in general. This list would be entirely different if I was doing actual subclasses rather than just supers. Now, the 6-shot Golden Gun is viable, but I would question your usage outside of PvP. Main reason is because the main reason why it's down here is mostly due to the Celestial Nighthawk and the Giga Chat that is the 3-shotty. So, that's the biggest reason why it's down here. It's still a pretty solid super. I would not use Celestial with this. I would use a different super. But they're really, like, Shards of Galanor is great for ad clearing, and this one just does not fulfill that role quite as well. I don't know, I think it's viable, so that's why it's not going to questionable use. I'm not going to question your usage of the super, but, you know, it's one of those kind of iffy situations. Now, on to Void. Void, we have some interesting stuff. I'm putting this below Blade Fury. This is the 1-shotty tether. The biggest reason why it's only in pretty solid, it would have been super good because it does really solid damage. It applies a weaken for an extended period of time. It does obviously suppress as well. It's great, but the biggest problem here is the other tether exists, and we'll get there when we get there. But also, we have so many sources of weaken now. We've had Tractor Cannon. Obviously, Divinity has an option. This season, we have Breach and Clear back. And there's obviously Weakening Grenade as well. There's also Buried Bloodline as well, which does apply Weaken when you have Devour. So yeah, and also there's Throwing Axes as well, which not only does boss damage, but it also weakens. So those are its biggest weaknesses. However, the reason why I'm putting it above Throwing Axes is casting time is way fucking lower. It also does have an exotic that works with it, but again, that's not being considered for Axis placement. But it also generates a lot of orbs, so Axis just takes so long that I'd rather use a different Void super. Being perfectly honest, but it's still a solid option. But yeah, Tether is pretty solid. It does last a while, and if you don't have a weakening option, this is a pretty solid option for Hunters, especially when to keep the rest of Void Hunter's kit. Now, Mobius Quiver is going in super good. Also, congratulations, Hunters! You officially make up the large majority of the super good supers. You actually make up more than half. Congratulations, Hunters! That will not be remaining. But Mobius Quiver is the 3-shotty. Because I believe the other one's called Deadfall. Or Deadshot or something like that. But this is the, well, not 3-shotty, but it's a 2 for activation, but it fires 3 arrows. This super, Onslaught. Onslaught is the biggest reason why it's up here. It does do that whole weaken suppression thing. However, it does really good damage as well. It's just extremely good for ad clearing because you can place it in two completely different spots. And even for like boss damage, it's not that bad either because you can fire it, shoot a few weapons, like then fire it again. It's not like a, you know, a one-off and that's kind of it. So you can kind of extend how long that debuff applies for. But and I'm not completely sure that this applies weaken, but I know it at least applies suppression. And it generates a crap ton of orbs. Like, holy shit, it's a generate crap ton of orbs. So yeah, the super is just so good, mostly because of Onslaught. It is the best ad clearing super for Void Hunters. The only reason why it's not as high as Hammer of Saul is due to Hammer of Saul just lasts quite a bit, and it does pretty solid single target damage as well consistently. It's just survivability and just everything the super has is just so good. But Notice Cover is quite up there. Now, Hunters, I know you make up the majority of the super good supers. Now, join the Warlocks in the pits of never use. Spectral Blades is going to never use. Actually, in my opinion, the biggest reason why it is down here is because the tethers are so good. If the tethers were not as good as they were, which by the way, my suggestion for both of those supers, just combine them. There really is no reason for them to be separate in my personal opinion, especially now that we have so many weakening options. But Spectral Blades, in my personal opinion, if the tethers were not as good, this would be a lot better. The positives here is you go invisible quite a bit. It's decent at ad clearing. It's also it's kind of a similar situation to Storm's Edge as far as it's not good enough at ad clearing to be properly called an ad clearing super, but it's also not good enough at single target damage to be called a single target damage super either. It's not good at dealing with champions or anything like that either, so it's kind of in a similar situation. However, the reason why Spectral Blades is lower than Storm's Edge is due to Storm's Edge is serviceable, while Spectral Blades there is no reason to run the super, and I also don't have very many suggestions to do this. The heavy attack. The heavy attack is the biggest reason why this is down here. The heavy attack is useless. It's just completely useless. The heavy attack should volatile. So at least artificially extend the range of this super. Like, the heavy attack should volatile. I don't understand why it doesn't. The heavy attack also needs to have its damage increased flat out. My suggestion to Hunters, if you want to, again, feel what it's like to have a Titan, some Titan supers, just use Spectral Blades in a high-end setting. Because the majority of your supers, outside of Arc Staff, I believe this is the only super outside of Arc Staff where you have to be at close range to make any use of the super. And even Arc Staff has some range stuff. So those are my notes that is my tier list for Hunter supers. And you know, of course, sticking around to hear thoughts on stuff. As you know, we talk about things. We're gonna go into the general stuff a little bit. So obviously, Hunters make up the amount of super good supers. I think this is perfectly justifiable. Warlocks only having one super good super also kind of makes sense. We'll get into Warlocks in a second. Meanwhile, pretty solid here. Warlocks make up quite a bit of this tier. So that is something. A lot of Warlock supers are just pretty solid. They're in a pretty decent state. There are a few minor changes that I will make to Warlock supers in general. Titans are kind of all over the place. But also, you know, obviously, Hunters only have 3 supers that are viable and lower. Everything else is super good or pretty solid. Meanwhile, Titans do make up the majority of questionable and viable. Meanwhile, Warlocks and Titans, I do feel like have supers that are not particularly great. But while for Warlocks, a lot of the reasons for their supers being so low is due to the other options being so good. For Titan, the supers are just kind of bad. The supers are just kind of bad. So this is where we kind of talk about the unique stuff. We're going to start with Titan, then Warlock, then Hunter stuff that I'm using, but it's kind of going to mix together. Titans. Okay, this is my observations here. The majority of Titan supers are enhanced versions of the melees. That's just what they are. Again, if you want to look at, we can just go down the list here. Thunder Crash, Ballistic Slam, Fist of Havoc, Shoulder Charge, Blade Fury, the Strand Melee, Glacial Quake, the Stasis Melee. Sentinel Shield, Shield Bash. Shield Throw came out way after Sentinel Shield did, so that's why, like, Shield Bash is here. Axes and Bowl are the only supers that Titan have that are not an enhanced version of a melee. And technically speaking, Bubble's an enhanced version of Barricade, but we're not going there. So that's kind of an interesting note. However, this is acceptable in a sense. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention Solar. Solar, Hammer Assault, Throwing Hammer, Burning Maul, Hammer Strike. Specifically, the Light Attack is just an enhanced version of Hammer Strike. Now, this is fine because the melees are unique to Titans. The Titan melees are unique. However, if like Warlock started and Hunter started to get Titan melees, I would start being pissed. I would start getting pissed. I hope that Bungie is a little bit more imaginative with the supers, but it kind of feels like that they come up with the super first and then they just give whatever the light attack it is. Oh, let's just make that Titan's melee. And it feels like that's kind of how Titan supers are designed, which I'm not really a huge fan of. Now, Warlocks, I actually believe Warlocks have the most unimaginative supers ever. I think Warlocks, creativity-wise, have the worst set of supers imaginable. If you want to, and it's mostly because a lot of their supers are based off of pre-existing abilities. Some melees, most grenades. Which, the issue with having supers being based off of grenades is grenades are not unique to Guardian classes. Which I kind of feel like they should be, because especially since things like Touch of Flame and, you know, Touch of Thunder exist. Or whatever the Solar Warlock one is. I'm kind of surprised Hunters don't have one. Well, no, they do with Stasis, actually. Never mind. Now, if we go through Warlock Supers here, obviously the Solar ones are quite unique, right? My biggest issue with Song of Flame is its grenade is usually a unique model, yes. But the melee is just the snap. Why? Why couldn't they come up with anything unique for the Warlock melee? It's just a fucking snap. Like, I know the snap is, oh, it's new, but, like, why? By the way, Warlocks, I do not use the snap on Solar Warlock ever. I use the Celestial Fire. That's just how I usually roll. I'm not used to really a widespread melee. That's not something I'm a huge fan of, but, so, yeah, just keep that in mind. So, and then, obviously, you have Void Warlock, which is the worst offender. Nova Warp is different, but both Nova Bombs are just Axion Bolt and Vortex Grenade. That's it. And they're not really even an enhanced version of them. They're more so just a big version of the grenades. Like, why? And Arc Warlock is a little bit different. Both Chaos Reach and Chaos Accelerant, both are essentially an enhanced version of Arc melees, but Chaos Reach is a reach. But I hate myself. Now, Stasis Warlock is just melee the super. That's why I thought, you know, hey, adding slow stacks to the heavy might at least separate it a little bit more from the melee. But realistically speaking, the light attack, which is the strongest part of the super, is just the melee repeatedly. Like, why? And the heavy animation is not unique enough. And Threadling Grenade, Needlestorm. Needlestorm is just an enhanced version of Threadling Grenade. That's it. That is why I was like, okay, separating this from Threadling Grenade would be, hey, let the bolts have Suspending Burst. That would separate it from Threadling Grenade at least a bit. So, yeah. Warlock supers, in my opinion, are quite unimaginable. Hunters have the best supers. That's just how it is. That's just how it is. Especially if you go through a lot. The staffs and Storm's Edge are not really an enhanced version of a grenade or a melee. You could argue that Gathering Storm is an enhanced version of Arc Bolt Grenade, but you have to add a fragment in order to make that argument. And Void Hunter, obviously the bow is not related to a melee or anything. Spectral Blades isn't either. And for Solar Hunter, the knives, obviously Blade Fury, yes, enhanced version of a melee. But the Golden Guns are not. Right? You know, and you look at Strand Hunter, yes, enhanced version of the melee, and you have a grenade. Yeah. And however, Stasis Hunter, not not an enhanced version of a pre-existing ability. So yeah. Um, and especially if you consider the wide variety of weapons each Guardian class uses, like Titans use hammers and shield, axes as well, but a little bit of a, you know, 3 weapons, right? Warlocks, you know, you have sword and technically staff, but that's it. Which does make sense for warlocks, because you know you're space mages. But like hunters, you have guns, you have knives, you have a whip, you have a sickle. You have you have so much fucking shit. You have whip, staff, knife, gun, bow, and like sickle. Like you have quite a bit of weapons here, which am I necessarily a huge fan of? No, but like the hunter supers are just flat out better. But on that note, though, that's going to do it for the hunter supers. I have finished editing the Titan section. Also, a video that will be coming out in the future will be ranking the From Software games, and that's going to be a hot dealio. Because I have seen the comments on the one where I ranked all the bosses, and people massively disagreed with the, at least someone massively disagreed with the Elden Ring stuff, which I'm surprised no one has disagreed with Bloodborne. I feel like I had a lot of hot takes for Bloodborne, but yeah, do keep in mind, especially with the tier list, and whenever I do a tier list, I have a lot of time in these games that I do. So yeah, I have a crap ton of time in Destiny 2. Most of it's with Titan, but yeah. On that note, though, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch y'all on the flip side.